We're going to consider for a little while this morning. We find in verse 13, Acts 4, verse 13. And when they saw the boldness of Peter and John, they perceived that they were uneducated, common men, they were astonished. They recognized that they had been with Jesus. Particularly that last sentence. They recognized that they had been with Jesus. 10,000. It's not a small number, it's a large number. Imagine if tomorrow morning you check your bank account and some kind person had put $10,000 into it that you weren't expecting. You'd be, I think, rejoicing, you would be glad, and wondering who it was that was being so kind to you. But what happens if it is that you go to Facebook tomorrow morning and you find that 10,000 people have wanted to become your friend? Again, it might make you feel good even for a little while, and you would hope that perhaps you might, over the next period of time, come to know something of who these 10,000 new friends that you have are. Well, the reason that I bring this number 10,000 before you is because the World Health Organization over the past week has declared that the number of deaths due to the Ebola outbreak has exceeded 10,000. That's what I'm saying, it's not a small number. It's a large number of individuals and human beings. And it seems that out of that, a minimum of 10,000, 4,922 of those individuals have died. When I was thinking over that number, it really made me think that in spite of our ingenuity, in spite of the advances that have taken place with regard to medical science, in spite of the sophistication that it is that we in the West declare that we have, yet it is at various times and in various locales that men and women are crushed, men and women are beaten and indeed killed by disease of one sort or another. When you think on it, the Ebola virus, if you've been reading up on it, you need to have a microscope to see what this virus is like. It's so small. And yet something so small can be so devastating in the lives even of those who perhaps are well and fit and strong. The frightening thing is that at the moment, there is no proven vaccine or cure. If it is that you catch Ebola, it would seem, humanly speaking, that the odds are on you will die. Well, likewise, 2,000 years ago, there were diseases that if you caught them, you would also die as well. Not only that, if there were diseases or illnesses that afflicted you, then it is that your life would be one of misery and hardship. Severe illness, whether caused by a virus or a defect from birth, it would mean in most ordinary cases it would lead to a life of misery and hardship. And if it is that you go back to chapter 3 of the Acts of the Apostles, that's what it is that we're told about this man that Peter and John had dealings with, and were able to grant him the ability to walk again. He was lame, and therefore all it is that he could do was beg. You read this in chapter 3 and verse 2. And a man lame from birth was being carried, whom they laid daily at the gate of the temple that is called the Beautiful Gate, to ask alms of those entering the temple. Now it would seem that his friends, they were savvy, that they were concerned. They knew that if they placed them at this gate, that those who were entering the temple, seeking to worship God, that hopefully that their conscience would convict them, and they would put some alms, they would put some money into his begging bowl, or whatever it might be. I'm not quite sure at the end of every day when it was that his friends came to pick him up and take him back home, that there was quite an amount of money that worshippers had given before it was they entered into the worship of the temple. But mercifully, God brought this individual into contact with Peter and John. And it is that we read in chapter 3 that there were two results. First one was that the beggar was healed. And it is that we read there in verses 6 to 10 something of what took place. How it was that in the name of Jesus, Peter said, I don't have silver, I don't have gold, but what it is that I do have, I give you. And it is that I command you in the name of Jesus Christ to rise up and walk. And we read that his ankles became strong and so on. And it was that as Peter took him by the hand, that the man who was over 40 years of age, who had been a cripple since the moment of his conception and his birth, it was the case that he stood up. And naturally you can imagine something of the joy that characterized this individual. And the Spirit through Luke captures some of this, because it is that we read that he was leaping and jumping and praising, and no doubt shouting concerning what God had done for his soul. And I think you can imagine something perhaps of the reservedness and even the embarrassment of those who were the so-called religious leaders of the day, that it wasn't something that was right, it wasn't something that was proper to be found doing in the temple. Yet it is that this individual who had experienced the mighty power of God in his soul, he could only do what it was that he was doing, and that was leaping and praising and jumping God for his grace to him. But the second thing that we read is that Peter and John were arrested. For it is that you read verse 3, we read in chapter 4, and they arrested them and put them in custody until the next day, for it was already evening. Then as you go to verse 7 of chapter 4, you read that they're brought before the religious leaders and the authorities. And then from verse 8 onwards, Peter, filled with the Holy Spirit, we're told, addresses the gathering. Then when you come to verse 13, the verse for this morning, we read that these men were astonished. That's literally what the word means. It is that they were shocked, they were amazed. And the reason for their amazement was this, and it comes out very clearly here. Peter and John, as far as they were concerned, were uneducated, ordinary men. As far as the council was concerned, Peter and John were typical of the peasants of the day. They were uneducated. They were utterly ordinary individuals. They were those who seemed to have no redeeming qualities, and certainly in terms of where it was that they were and what it was that they had done, that this was totally not in accordance with whom it was that the council considered was standing before them. But it is that the council, even in spite of its hardness, even in spite of its blindness, it is that the council, ignorant as they were, that they recognised one thing. And the one thing was this, that these men, Peter and John, that these men were companions of Jesus Christ. Now how is it that the council knew this? As far as they were concerned concerning Peter and John, it wasn't in their education. They themselves knew that they probably never attended school. They'd certainly never been to the rabbinical schools, and it was that they were just ordinary working class individuals, and it was that they had no formal religious training. Yet in the midst of the temple, they had accomplished and performed this great miracle. It wasn't even in terms of the credentials that were there. It wasn't the case that Peter and John could come up to the high priest and his family and say, well, here's my card. It's Peter the fisherman. And what I've got is MA, BD, MTH, PhD. And it is that his card was filled with all the qualifications that he had. They had no qualifications, humanly speaking, whatsoever. And it certainly wasn't in terms of their religious pedigree. I think it's interesting when you read in verse 6 that you've got Annas the high priest, and Caiaphas, and John and Alexander, and all who were of the high priestly family. It is that the Spirit's reminding us of the pedigree and the spiritual and religious pedigree of those before whom it was that Peter and John were brought before. But when you saw Peter, when you considered John, as it were, there was no religious pedigree whatsoever. They couldn't say, well, my father and my grandfather and my great-grandfather, they were elders in the Free Church or ministers in the Free Church long before I ever came to be. It was that they were not able to say anything like this. But what we find is this, that in the Spirit-filled boldness that the Spirit gave them, and also from knowing Jesus Christ, they were able to speak and perform what it was that they did in and through this miracle. Think of the context for a minute. Peter and John have just healed a cripple in the temple. When it is that a crowd gathers, you read in chapter 3 from verse 11, that Peter seizes the moment to preach a gospel message. Then as you come to chapter 4 in the first 12 verses, they're arrested, they're thrown in jail, and then it is that Peter addresses the religious leaders. And in thinking about what it is that Peter does at this point, I think it helps to remember this one fact. That as Peter is brought before the religious leaders, and as it is that he makes his defense at this point, Peter is standing in front of murderers. Because that's what they were. These are men, religious men as they were, great pedigrees from the rabbinical schools and so on. These are men who conspired to kill Jesus Christ just a few weeks earlier. And I think we say something to Peter's credit that he didn't back down at this point. Because I'm quite sure that this must have been something that was going through his own mind. Yet it is that Peter, as he speaks to them, he clearly identifies their guilt and God's declaration concerning his Son. Look at the words of verse 10. Peter says, Jesus, whom you crucified, and then in the same verse he says, Jesus, whom God raised. And it is that he concludes his sermon with a clarion call in verse 7 when he says, "Neither is there salvation in any other, for there is none other name under heaven given among men whereby we must be saved." It is that he points to the exclusiveness and the exclusivity of the person and the work of Christ and those who follow Christ. Now, one writer I was looking at put it like this. He said, "It's been well said that a crisis never made any man. It only reveals what he already is." A crisis never made any man. It only reveals what he already is. But in this case, the crisis of their arrest, it was something that revealed the truth about Peter and John. The religious leaders couldn't figure them out. They couldn't deny the healing, and you see their obtuseness and indeed how foolish they were. You'd have expected them to say, "Well, heal all the cripples. Bring benefit to our society." That's not what they wanted. They wanted to cast these men aside. The one thing they couldn't deny was the boldness of Peter and John, and they couldn't deny the fact that they were companions of Jesus Christ. Now the question, I think, is at this point, why were they not intimidated? Why were Peter and John bold at this point? How is it that these uneducated, ordinary individuals could make such an impact? Why were they not intimidated by their arrest? Have you ever been arrested? Have you ever been in the situation where you're about to be arrested? Maybe we should get John up here to tell us something about what's involved. But it's frightening, especially if it is that you don't know your rights. When the cuffs have been placed on you and so on, you can imagine something of what it must have been like. How is it that they could dare to speak so freely? What was their secret? Well, the religious leaders came to this simple and yet profound conclusion: they had been with Jesus. Now let's stop there for a moment. Because I think that no fact is more important for our consideration today. That they had been with Jesus, and that we challenged ourselves. Have we been with Jesus? You see, all around us, we see signs of the diminishing impact of Christianity upon our culture. We see it in terms of the events of the past week within Canada itself. It seems that we live at a time when you can say and do anything, no matter how shocking or untruthful or foolish it may be. It is that you can be a man, but if you want to, you can say you're a woman. If it is that you're a man and you say you don't know what you are, you can say that as well. That's how stupid it is that our society is becoming. But the reason for this is the diminishing impact of Christianity upon our culture, and therefore it follows on the diminishing impact of those of us who are Christians in the culture in which God Himself has placed us. One of the passages of God's Word that it's good to read and remember from time to time is what it is in the Old Testament when we read concerning the men of Issachar, that the men of Issachar were men who had understanding of the times in which it is that they lived. And I think it's screaming out in terms of our culture today that we have an understanding of the times in which it is that we live, that we seek to grapple with some of the great movements that are taking place, even to the point perhaps when it is that folk would say we're guilty by association. Because here it is that you have these two apostles, and it is that they're in the midst of the religious literati of the day, and it is that these men are moved to say they're uneducated, they're unschooled, they don't have PhDs or anything else. But the one thing that we see is that they're companions of Jesus Christ. You see, we bemoan the advance of secularism as we watch the crumbling of social institutions that have stood in place for 1,000 years. And yet perhaps it is, because we're not like Peter and John. It is that we wonder why Christians have lost why we've lost our influence in our society. And I think it is that this verse offers us a very clear answer and challenge. You see, the reason that these uneducated peasants of the day turned the world upside down was because they had a life-changing encounter with Jesus Christ. That was their secret. That single fact explains the boldness of these first-generation Christians and explains the boldness of Peter. You think what had taken place just 2 or 3 weeks earlier. He'd been in the courtyard warming himself. And it is that he'd been challenged, and it was said, your speech betrays you. You're a Galilean. It's like wherever I go, people say to me, you're not Canadian by birth. It is that your speech and your accent betrays you. And I said, yeah, I'm a Glaswegian, not a Galilean, a Glaswegian. I come from Glasgow. It's the self-same thing as Peter. Then it is that there's this little slip of a lass, and she challenges him. And here you've got this fisherman, Peter. He's terrified. He denies Jesus. He ends up with swear words, curses, dropping F-bombs, no doubt, here, there, and everywhere. He's so upset. Then the cock crows and Christ looks straight at him. It is that Peter runs and weeps. But here, 2 to 3 weeks later, what do you find? He's in the midst of the hotbed of Judaism. And it is that he's proclaiming Jesus Christ boldly and clearly. The reason was that Peter and John and all who follow in their footsteps don't fit into the ordinary categories of religion. And that's what we need to take home with us today. That if we are Christ's, and if we are companions of Christ, that humanly speaking, we do not fit into the ordinary categories of religion. Now the problem is, and the danger is, that you can be around Jesus and yet not be with Jesus. You see, what's happening here is more than just knowledge. It's more than just a few prayers. It's more than religion as a hobby, but it was something that produced a dynamic power that transformed ordinary, uneducated men into bold witnesses for Jesus Christ. And I think that leads to the first application of what we're considering is this. Listen carefully. First application is, it's dangerous to be around Jesus and not with Jesus. It's dangerous to be around Jesus and not with Jesus. You see, there's a difference, and a clear difference, between being around Jesus and being with Jesus. There's a clear difference between being around Christians and being with Jesus. I can think of countless people that I've known through my lifetime. And it is, they love to be with Christian people. They've loved to attend Christian gatherings. They've loved everything, in a sense, that the church has to offer. But at the end of the day, they're not with Jesus. They haven't bowed the knee, they haven't confessed their sins, and they will not publicly, even in terms of what happens in the life of the church, make their stand for Jesus. So there's a difference being around Christian events and being with Jesus, and there's a difference in terms of being around the church and being with Jesus. There are countless tens of thousands in our city today, and they're around the church. Whether it be Presbyterian, Episcopalian, Baptist, whatever it may be, they're around the church. But they're not with Jesus. They could never truly say, well, he's my companion, he's my friend. But you see, the disciples, they had been with Jesus. That's what the verse is saying. They recognized that they had been with Jesus. Not that they had been around Jesus, but they had been with Jesus. And with Jesus meant that they intimately knew everything about him, and that changed everything. Even their enemies could see the difference that had made in their lives, that they were with Jesus. Now I think leads us to the second application, is this. I think we have here what we could term as the doctrine of unconscious influence. Let me say it again, the doctrine of unconscious influence. And it's something that we need to consider and pray about. You may be sitting there saying, I don't find that in Berkhoff or a Hodge or anybody else. The doctrine of unconscious influence, what are you talking about? What's this? Finite creatures as we are, even as Christians, we really don't know what it is that others think about us. And we don't know what effect it is that we are having and producing in others that God brings across our path. See, often I think it is that we're not good judges of our own influence. How often is it that we know, in terms of what someone says to us, that they're seeing things and understanding things about us that we don't even see or understand about ourselves? We're not told, if we take it from our text, that Peter and John said, we have been with Jesus. Didn't come from them. Now, it was true. They had been with Jesus, and they could rightly have said, we have been with Jesus. Wouldn't be boasting, but that's not what they said. It was the fact that those whom they were having an influence upon, that they took note that they'd been with Jesus. It was something that, as it were, characterized their whole being, their whole demeanour. Jewish leaders weren't impressed by Peter and John, but they were a big surprise. One writer I was looking at put it like this: what chance had these uneducated fishermen in the presence of the whole college of learned rabbis? Yet the rabbis were made to look very foolish, and the fishermen won a triumph such as a philosopher might have envied. Remember, Peter and John weren't looking for confrontation. They'd gone to the temple to pray, not to perform a healing, not to preach, and certainly not to get themselves arrested. It's nothing more than ordinary obedience. Look what happened when it is that these honourable men did the right thing. They were doing what Christians should always do. They were ready to give an answer for the hope that was in them, as God brought these individuals into their life. And look how it is that they gave an answer for the hope that was in them. And what happened? Got them into trouble. Are we prepared for that? Really? Are we prepared for that? That when the time comes that we must give an answer to the authorities and the powers that be for the hope that is within us, are we then prepared to get arrested? To be thrown into the prison cell? I think that day's coming. Even when we've heard, I think I said something about it last week, about what was happening in the States and the furore that there was. The certain pastors, the authorities were saying, we want to see your sermons before you preach them. Why? Because it is that they were concerned that they would be preaching biblical truth concerning gender and homosexuality and so on. That's just the beginning. I sometimes wonder for young men like Johnny here and others of his generation what it is that they will face as they preach the gospel, and whether it is that they might end up in prison because they simply told the truth. What was the truth? You crucified Jesus. You really did. 2-3 weeks ago, that's what you did. You crucified him. But the second thing they said was, God raised him from the dead, and he's alive forevermore. Now that's bold, that's powerful, that's courage in steroids. It really is. This is ordinary obedience. What happened? Many of those who'd heard the word believed, and the number of men, in verse 4, came to about 5,000. Wow, talk about revival. Look at the sequence of the events. Obedience, a miracle, preaching, thousands saved, jailed, boldness under pressure. No wonder these religious men said, these men have been with Jesus. Shaky Peter became solid as a rock. He really did. What it's saying is that when Jesus Christ commandeers our life, the change will be made evident to all. Though it was that the leaders hated what it was that Peter was saying, they couldn't deny what Christ had done in them. And you see the perversity of human thinking in terms of what they say. Even their enemies knew that Peter and John had been with Jesus. The third application is that no higher compliment could be paid to a child of God. Somebody out there either thinks or says to you, you've been with Jesus. Is that what people say when they meet us? Is that what they leave with, the impression that they have? You've been with Jesus. If we're being honest, probably not. Probably not. And we wonder why it is that we're not as influential as we should be. So the question then is, what are the marks of someone who's been with Jesus? What are the marks? Let's just, in the time that's left, let's look at these. Obviously, if it is that we're Christians, we want something of Jesus to rub off on us. So exactly what does that look like? Well, I think the best answer that we can give, and I find it hard to improve on this answer, is what you find in John's Gospel, chapter 1 and verse 14, which says that Jesus was full of grace and truth. And I think even the order there is very significant. It's not full of truth and grace, but it's full of grace and truth. Now think in that phrase. You're drawn to the fact that Jesus was full of grace and truth. Anyone can be truthful some of the time or loving some of the time, but Jesus was overflowing and was filled to overflowing with grace and truth. Truth and grace. In other words, he spoke the truth with grace. But he showed grace in the truth that he spoke. And he said, semantics. No, it's not. Have you ever met someone who's good at telling the truth, and yet it is they cause World War III when they tell the truth? Do you remember that film? I think it was on the go when we came here 18 years ago. Jim Carrey was at Liar Liar. And it is that for 24 hours or something, you can only tell the truth. And you saw something of the chaos that he caused by telling things as it were. Now, I'm not saying that, in terms of what Jesus said or did, that he didn't tell the truth. But what I'm saying is that Jesus never had to choose between grace or truth and grace. See, grace is what flows through the veins of Jesus, whose heart stubbornly beats for us, a sinner loved by the one who endured the cross, despising its shame, to bring us back, as it were, to Eden. And that one virtue of boldness will never make you like Christ. You can be bold, but be unchristlike in the way that you're bold. There are some even in the history of the church, and have been what we would term as noble men, but I think they've carried their courage to excess. And it is that they've thus been caricatures of Christ, and not portraits of Christ. There's a big difference between a caricature and a portrait. And it is that we're going to mingle and amalgamate with our boldness the loveliness of the disposition of Jesus. Listen to what Spurgeon says. Let your love and courage be mingled together. The man who is bold may indeed accomplish wonders. John Knox did much, but he might perhaps have done more if he'd had a little love. Luther was a conqueror, peace to his ashes and honour to his name. Still, we who look upon him at a distance think that if he had sometimes mixed a little mildness with it and spoken somewhat more gently, he might have done more good than he did. So, brethren, while we too are bold, let us ever imitate the loving Jesus. That's Spurgeon saying that in the 19th century. Think about the child who comes to Jesus. Jesus sits the child on his knee and says, suffer the little children to come unto me and forbid them not. Think about the widow who's just lost her only son. Her means were, humanly speaking, of support. And it is that Jesus weeps at the coffin, and with a word it is he restores the young man to life. Think of how it is that Jesus sees a paralytic, long confined to his bed. He speaks and the paralytic rises and is healed. Think of how it is that Jesus lived for others and not for himself. And the challenge is this. I think many Christians, and I include myself in this, that we're willing to put up with social outcasts and misfits. We're willing to put up with them. But that isn't grace, that's tolerance. And that's what you'll find being exemplified very much by the non-Christian. You see, where there's no stubborn, no pursuit, no stubborn delight, that's a superficial Christianese grace. Bless this food to our bodies. It's just Christianese. But it's not charis. It's not grace. Let me quote again from the book that I've been quoting from the past few weeks, by the chap with a name that's difficult to forget, Preston Sprinkle. And it is that Preston Sprinkle's book on grace. It's really challenged me and thought, wow, you've got to rethink a lot of the things that you held to, Allan. and have spoken about. It really is. Listen to what he says. God aggressively and delightfully values and uses thugs and misfits to build his glorious kingdom. And the thugs that he's referring to there are the 12 that Jesus chose. Because when you get down to it, many of them basically were thugs. Abrasive, thick-headed people like Peter, hot-headed racists like James and John, violent brawlers and extortionists like Simon and Matthew, and mentally deranged back ladies like Mary Magdalene. He doesn't give them a bowl of soup and shuffle them out of the church. He gives them responsibility, the hallmark of genuine value, and trusts in the God who uses the weak to shame the strong. Grace isn't a term, it's not a doctrine, it's not a buzzword. It's not the words of a song, a prayer before meals, a name plastered on our churches. It's not leniency or niceness. It's not something that can be domesticated or completely understood. And it's something that can never grow old or stale. In other words, Sprinkle's saying that our life should carry the aroma of heaven. Because that's what Christ was like. Those who follow Christ will have that grace and that truth rub off on them. And that therefore points to a life that's marked by humility, by honesty, by approachability, kindness under pressure, truth-telling when it would be easier to tell a lie. A life like that carries the aroma of heaven wherever it goes. Remember the comment that someone I knew made about an individual? He said this: whenever they entered the room, I felt a little closer to heaven. Whenever they entered the room, I felt a little closer to heaven. Are you like that? Whenever you enter a room, people will say, man, I just feel that little bit closer. There's something about them. The aroma of heaven is with that person. A man or a woman or a young person filled with grace draws you closer to the Lord. That's what they do. What I'm saying is this: that whether they're talking or listening, laughing or crying, standing or sitting, falling or leading, they've got the aroma of heaven about them. Do we have that aroma? Grace and truth. So how's it developed? Well, for many it comes through people in pain. The best Christians I have ever known have proved the truth of Job 23:10. What does Job 23:10 say? It says this: He knows the way that I take. When he has tried me, I will come forth as gold. He knows the way that I take, but when he has tried me, I will come forth as gold. In other words, there are no shortcuts to a life of tested gold. Sometimes you've got to go through the furnace. That's the way it is. That's the way that God in his inscrutability deals with us as his people. And it is so that God can refine you in the gold of tested character. Until then, it's all theory. It's all buzzwords. It's all books. It's all in the study. But after your experience and after being in the furnace, you know from experience the power of Jesus Christ to deliver you. And it is that a divine life cannot be concealed. The Lord knows nothing, doesn't understand it, can't duplicate it. One writer said this: there's a wide difference between a Christian and a worldly man in times of trouble. The worldly man is timid, irritable, and restless. The Christian man is calm, courageous, and hopeful. Nothing can calm and strengthen a man more than a full assurance of God's protection. Spurgeon said, any fool can sing in the sunlight. He probably sums up in one sentence what that fellow took 5 or 6 sentences to say. But it's true, any fool can sing in the sunlight. You can sing in the shower in the morning, and you think you're sounding like Pavarotti as you sing in the shower. But when you step out of the shower, get dried, and go out into the day, and if there are difficulties that day, it's a lot harder to sing then than in the shower that morning. So what is it that you'll do when you're thrown in jail for your faith? What will you do? What will I do? What is it if, when those of us who are in our 50s, God spares us to our 80s, and we see our children, or even perhaps our grandchildren, being thrown in jail for their faith in Christ? Don't say I'm exaggerating. Unless God comes in reviving power, that's the way things are going in the West. Well, if you're Peter and John, you preach Jesus. You stay calm and you preach Jesus. You preach the resurrection. That's what you preach. It's costly, but even when the times of trouble come, even your enemies can see the difference that Jesus has made in your life. So where should we begin then? I'm finishing. As I was preparing for today, I came across a sermon on this text that Spurgeon preached. Now the thing about Spurgeon is, often in one text he can maybe have 4 or 5 sermons, and they're all totally different. You see the genius of the man, and God blessed him. But in this particular verse, he preached a sermon in 1855, and he gave it the title, Christ's People, Imitators of Him. Christ's People, Imitators of Him. And in the sermon, Spurgeon covers the why and where of becoming more like Christ, what it means to be a companion of Jesus. And then in his last section, he urges his readers to know Christ personally and to be more like Christ. And then he adds this, he says, if we would be more like Christ, we must seek more of the Spirit of God. Lastly, he says, is the best advice I can give, seek more of the Spirit of God, for this is the way to become Christ-like. Vain are all your attempts to be like Him till you have sought His Spirit. So take your heart, not cold as it is, not stony as it is by nature, but put it into the furnace. There let it be molten, and after that it can be turned like wax to the seal and fashioned into the image of Jesus Christ. In other words, Spurgeon's saying, you'll not become Christ-like by accident. You'll not become Christ-like by osmosis. But there is something that you must do. You not become Christ-like by mere self-effort. And it is, even money itself will not get you into heaven. Spurgeon at the end of the sermon says that if we've been like Christ on earth, we will be like Him in heaven. And then he says this, he imagines an angel at the gates of heaven, waiting to admit those who look like Jesus and who were companions of Jesus. And he says, and I quote, the angel turns away a man with a crown of earthly greatness, and a man with a vast education, and someone who possesses rare beauty. Finally, and this is very much, I think, for today, the angel turns away a celebrity. Our celebrity culture. The angel will turn the celebrities away. Spurgeon says, none of that will matter in the least at the gate of heaven. But the things that matter on earth but if the things that matter on earth don't matter in heaven, who then will ever be admitted? And this is Spurgeon's answer. Then there appears another. Poor he may have been, illiterate he may have been, but the angel, as he looks at him, smiles and says, listen to this. It is Christ again. A second edition of Jesus Christ is here. Come in, come in. Eternal glory thou shalt win. Thou art like Christ. In heaven thou shalt sit, because thou art like Him. We're not there yet. We're on the way. But this is our challenge and our calling and our prayer today. Let's, whatever we've taken from this morning's sermon, let's leave here praying that Christ would be seen in us, that the Holy Spirit would fill us with grace and truth, and that the whole world would know by the way we are that we